The breath goes first. At dawn, the kitchens of the state guest house exhale steam and cardamom, trickling out through the louvered vents above the blue service door. Every morning, the same choreography. Crates of yams thud onto the tiled bench, a ledger unfurled beside the weighing scale, names entered in a looping hand, initials blooming into ink. The radio at the porter's station mutters a hymn to ordinary order, traffic updates, exam results, lost goats, and Miriam, who has worked these corridors since the roof still leaked, ties her headscarf twice to keep the sweat from her eyes. She is the resilient kind, the kind who knows which burner flickers and which spoon is honest, the kind who can tell fresh oil by the way it lifts a sliced onion's breath. She does not know that before noon she will collapse beside a crate, stamped with the seal of the procurement office and the oval, signature of a man who hates the smell of kitchens. The morning passes in the clink and hiss of hospitality. A convoy is due at noon, a visiting delegation that requires both caution and cassava. In the protocol corridor, doors swing like metronomes. Badges flash and phones blink as advisory notes arrive on telegram. Ibrahim walks this way every morning, down past the palm fronds and into the sun square, neither hurrying nor slow. A leader who prefers to start his day among the people who keep the state's breath measured. The drivers. The nurses in the clinic near the back gate. The gardeners who coax bougainvillea up from heat-cracked soil. Fate saved him once before, people say, when an armored door stuck for 30 seconds and delayed a route change. He calls it nothing but a stubborn hinge, and he laughs so the fear cannot settle in. By mid-morning, the deliveries include a consignment of cooking paste, 2 bottles of bright saffron oil, and a tray of sugared ginger. The labels look right. They always look right. The ledger receives them without complaint, each entry affirmed with the stamp of the Bureau des Approvisionnements, a gray office with a heavy safe and a fan that never turns fast enough. Director Sori, its master, has perfected the art of a gate that smiles while it takes its time. His favorite words are procedure and proper channels, words that dry the mouth when a nurse needs supplies, or when a cook asks why the uniform order is late again. He has held this gate for years. He believes the hinge moves on his hand alone. The wound shows itself quietly. Miriam opens a jar, dips the tasting spoon, and breathes in a bitterness under the ginger's sweet. She frowns. The kitchen heat could be playing tricks. She tastes a fingertip, enough to confirm a spice, not enough to color a dish. Moments later, her breath shortens. The room seems to tilt. The ledger's edges shimmer. She sits. Someone laughs because cooks sink into chairs all the time, but once they reach for water, the laughter drains. Once they call the nurse from the backgate clinic, the room rearranges itself around a new gravity. A young guard named Awa is first to reach her. She kneels, loosens Miriam's scarf, and counts to 4 with her own breath to steady the room. The ginger jar sits open on the bench, a small mouth in a sea of steam. The system that should catch what the nose cannot is a sequence of doors and signatures no one sees unless they are paid to see them. The kitchen checks are informal and quick. The procurement checks are formal and slow. When the 2 rhythms do not meet, corners become shadows where anything can wait. In the clinic, Salif, a nurse who left a provincial hospital for this post because the pay was steady and the patients less likely to curse his mother, begins a simple flush, follows it with oxygen. He watches Miriam's eyes. He has seen pesticides and bad alcohol. This is neither. He scribbles what he knows onto a white card, because the computer login lags when the network is tired. Outside, the convoy engines rattle the air. By the time Ibrahim steps into the sun square, a whisper has already reached Aminata, his aide. It moves the way whispers move in compounds like this, along drains, through palm leaves, under the breath of those who respect the walls but trust each other more. Aminata has learned to hear hardness inside soft words. The whisper says a kitchen porter is down, and that the jar on the bench smells like an argument. She moves without spectacle, out of respect for the dignity of people who do not like being watched when they are frightened. The radio, too, seems to lower its voice. The obstructive official appears not as a villain, but as a door that will not open until it has finished explaining itself. Director Sori is already composing sentences about plausible contamination outside his purview. He will talk about pallets that lingered at the market, about heat in transit, about the chef who once forgot to sign Form 11B. He will not mention the parcel that arrived late last night with the green sticker and the missing initial. He will not mention the soft money that moves faster than the fan in his office. The day has shifted. The hinge has tightened. The convoy is minutes away. The leader's breath remains even, but fate is already working the locks. When panic comes to government compounds, it lands first on paperwork. The kitchen ledger flutters as a clerk flips back pages, finding the origin of the ginger among the familiar scribbles of egg counts and gas deliveries. The naming matters. If a jar can be traced, a fault can be owned. If a fault can be owned, a breath can be given back to those who lost it. Yet here the name reads like a riddle. Same supplier, altered lot code, stamped with an oval seal darker than usual, the ink having bled as if the stamp had lingered too long. Awa watches the clerk's thumb hover over that bleeding oval. Salif steadies Miriam and asks for clean water, numbers her breaths, counts the seconds until the oxygen settles into its quiet companionship with her lungs. The convoy does not delay. Its sirens do not enter these service lanes. That is by design. The service lanes have their own sirens. The shriek of a kettle, the click of a lock, the distinct irritation of a refrigerator alarm when someone leaves it open to cool their forearms. Ibrahim meets the delegation at the front. The handshakes are dry and formal, the exchange of gifts effortless. Inside one gift is a letter from an ally who has long used the word brother too easily. The letter will read as warmth until a later hour. When Aminata returns to its run of the pen and notices where the pressure thins, the way a writer's breath thins when he learns to lie without moving his face. Escalation, in a place like this, is a series of closing doors. The clinic's back door clicks shut to keep the room quiet. The kitchen door is guarded, not out of spectacle, but because in a building where catering is as political as any speech, every rumor becomes a dagger. Awa chooses who passes, allowing Salif's assistant through with morning meds while turning away a curious protocol officer who has never helped wash a dish. The procurement office door, however, swings wide as Director Sori makes a show of transparency. He lays out binders like a grocer displays fruit, plump with tabs, abundant with clauses. He recites the tender process and smiles at his own diligence. He speaks so much about openness that the room cannot breathe. In the markets beyond the compound walls, news moves on soft feet. The ginger woman under the green umbrella hears that a porter fell, whispers an old proverb about sweetness covering teeth that are not clean. On WhatsApp, a voice message warns kitchen workers to avoid deliveries with a certain lot code. That message will teach the investigators two things later: that fear is faster than bureaucracy, and that ordinary networks of care always try to patch the holes elites pretend not to see. The community voice that carries this message, an FM radio host named Papa Idris, is careful. He does not name the guest house. He simply says, "If your ledger breathes, keep it in the light." The gate that blocks relief now is less a person than a shape, the nodding of processes that are supposed to protect, but instead silence. The tender rubric demands 3 signatures before anyone can seize a suspicious batch. The clinic's digital record requires a password renewal that expired on the last day of the previous quarter because the IT budget was frozen while the vehicle fleet was upgraded. Salif holds the white card again like a talisman against this digital amnesia and writes by hand, "Suspect ginger, bitter note, onset rapid." He asks for charcoal and a lab tech. The lab tech is in a training somewhere across town, learning the new reporting format for incidents that are never supposed to occur. Aminata calculates choices with the economy of a person who has watched one too many good hours squandered explaining why a form is late. She walks to Ibrahim as the delegation moves into the cool room with the microphones. Her voice is low. She does not gild the facts. She says a kitchen worker is ill, a jar is in question, and the origin stamp looks off. She says the convoy is on schedule and the meal plan includes the ginger. Ibrahim's eyes do not shift to the cameras, which already wait with their red lights, sleeping, ready to wake at a signal. He asks 2 questions. Is she stable? Is the jar secured? When the answers come, yes and not yet, the air changes. Escalation becomes visible in an action that is almost impolite. Ibrahim leaves the microphones to the delegation second. He walks the service lane. He passes the blue door. His security tries and fails to discourage him from entering the kitchen because they know cameras like these scenes and he does not. He steps into the heat and the quiet stares, nods to the cooks as if this were any other day, and looks at the jar that sits like a small sullen gate on the bench. He does not touch it. He looks at the ledger, the inked oval, the bleeds, the lot code that does not match the patterns from earlier months. He breathes, slow, taking the measure of the room's frightened generosity. Cooks who work twice as hard as the people who inspect them. A nurse whose hands have learned to refuse panic. Fate has its own work to do, but leadership, to matter, cannot wait. The obstructive official arrives with a tremor of offense. Director Sori makes noises about proper procedure, about chain of custody, about unauthorized verifications. He offers to take the jar to his office for safekeeping while the kitchen committee convenes. The cooks do not move. Awa, who knows that some doors only respect simple language, says the jar will not leave the kitchen without a receipt, a witness, and a photograph, with time and location sent to 3 separate numbers. She says it in the tone of someone who has fainted in public once and learned that you can be carried badly as easily as you can be carried well. The awkward silence that follows is the sound of a system that wants and fails to swallow courage. There is a line between a leader who watches and a leader who intervenes. Ibrahim steps across it as if changing rooms. He places his palm on the ledger, not touching the jar, not performing outrage, and signals to Aminata. She understands the choreography without a whisper. What happens next is not a speech, but a chain of small, reversible moves designed to restore breath before blame. He instructs the clinic to treat first and write later. He says the kitchen will switch to sealed reserve stock kept for emergency delegations. He asks Salif to remain with Miriam until her breathing is as deep as the shade outside the colonnade, and to send updates by voice note every quarter hour. He tells Awa to lock the blue door from the inside and determine who has entered since dawn by the smudges on the floor tiles, and the camera that only half works, but has one angle that never fails, the hand-washing sink. Every intervention begins with what is already in the room. The principle he names is plain: breath before billing. The kitchens have always been scolded for using extra stock when guests surprise planners. Today that scolding becomes a quiet threat to life, so he cancels it. He says it simply, as if canceling rain. The cooks stand a little taller. Procedure bows. Compassion stands up. A second instruction follows. One Aminata will later write into a circular with a title simple enough to survive cynicism: The First Bite Protocol. No one tastes alone. No batch begins service until a paired taster in a separate room samples a small portion from a sealed, time-stamped plate and waits 5 minutes under a nurse's eye. It is embarrassingly simple, therefore useful. It is reversible if grander systems arise, therefore not threatening to those who fear change. He calls for a sealed box from the small lab in the clinic, a box used for collecting water samples when the pipes run brown after long dry spells. The jar goes in untouched. Awa photographs the placement against the ledger with the date on today's newspaper and the angle of the clock on the wall. She sends the photos to 3 numbers: the clinic head, the legal advisor, and a community oversight volunteer from the neighborhood council who once served on the market hygiene committee. The choice of that 3rd number is deliberate and, to the old gatekeepers, blasphemous. It lets breath into the process. It puts sunlight on the hinge. Director Sori feels the center of his office moving in someone else's hand. He raises a clause about jurisdiction and sees it brushed aside by the oldest competence in the building. A cook who knows what a burnt pot looks like 2 minutes before the burn shows. Ibrahim does not raise his voice. He asks Sori to stand by while the chain of custody is drawn with fresh pen. He reminds him that the point of procurement is safety, not theater. He names no guilt. He names a duty that has been tired too long. It is harder than accusation and slower than anger, and Sori finds he has no prearranged sentence for this tone. On the radio, Papa Idris speaks about breath again. He does not mention the guest house. He narrates a story of a clinic that chose to write later and treat now, of a leader who met the hinge with oil instead of a hammer. He speaks as if telling a familiar fable more than a breaking event. The city listens. The WhatsApp voice messages change. They stop gloating over scandal and begin to exchange recipes for safety, how to label home bottles better, how to keep a small reserve of known good staples for days when the market looks too shiny. Intervention. To work always includes an ear for the truth teller who can walk the narrow path between loyalty and honesty. Aminata has kept a mental map of those paths for years. She invites into the room a quieter figure many would overlook, a storekeeper named Katie who counts by weight, not by signature. Katie remembers the lot code on the ginger that arrived last month with the invoice that did not stutter. She remembers because she once paid for a child's inhaler by selling 2 jars on the weekend, and she hated herself for it, and stopped and made a rule for her own life. Write every batch code in the small notebook tucked under the tea tin, double it in the official ledger later, and if the 2 don't match, ask why. She brings that notebook now. It opens like a door. The intervention shifts from care to containment. Ibrahim asks the head of the guest house to switch the meal order with a simple, dignified alternative. Citrus grilled with salt, millet couscous with mint, brochettes from a vendor vetted by the neighborhood council. He does not apologize for simplicity. He knows grandeur is a poor mask for fear. He records a short message for the delegation that explains the menu change without inviting gossip. A heat advisory, a lighter touch, hospitality as breath not display. There is a quiet defiance in refusing spectacle. It is a way of saying, we will not hurt our people to please your cameras. Back in the clinic, Salif notes the color returning to Miriam's face as oxygen finds its work. He dictates a voice note that breathes with relief but not triumph. He names what he knows and what he does not. He avoids guessing. He feels, for the first time in months, that the distance between his practice and policy has shortened by a hallway's length. He looks at the white card and imagines a dashboard where this moment could be counted, not for pride, but for instruction. He has seen too much loss to be lyrical. He prefers ledgers that breathe and can be audited by a woman with a tea-tin notebook. Outside, the blue door holds. The investigation begins with the softness of a cloth over a spill, not the hardness of a raid. A team assembles in the bland room behind the kitchen, where posters about hand-washing peel at the corners and where a scale has never quite balanced since someone tested it with a watermelon. Aminata asks for artifacts, not narratives. The ledger with the bleeding seal, Katie's tea-tin notebook, the sealed sample box, the delivery docket from the back gate, and the clinic's white card that holds the first facts. They lay them on the table in a line that looks like a single sentence written in 4 scripts. The smell of ginger is faint but present, a memory more than a promise. The lab analysis is done in-house at first, triage science, enough to tell a kitchen whether to throw away a morning. A strip test shows the presence of a compound that should not be in a jar of candied root. Not lethal in trace amounts, but arresting enough to bring breath to a stop if mixed with heat and fatigue. The strip turns a color the training booklet calls worry. Salif photographs the strip against the clinic window where light is honest. The photograph joins the other images on a secure channel created that morning with a 2-factor code known to 4 people. Aminata speaks the code aloud once so that no one can claim not to hear it later. Exposure usually waits, building an archive of little betrayals until there's a basketful. But this is a hinge moment, and hinge moments benefit from the dignity of speed. A message goes to the neighborhood council volunteer whose number took the photograph earlier. The message is simple: hold off gossip, hold hard facts ready. The volunteer, a woman who runs a small seamstress shop near the East Gate, replies with a thumbs up and a sentence that will become a motto for this whole season. We sow the whole, not the rumor. When you put a citizen in the chain before the press office, you invite the culture you say you believe in to testify. It either comes or it does not. Today, it comes. The procurement office fights the investigation with its favorite weapon, dust. Sori produces binders and minutes and last year's audit letter, the one that praised cost savings achieved by consolidating vendors. He presents a clause that shifts liability back toward the kitchen if any jar is opened prior to written acceptance. He points at a signature line and suggests it, not the jar, is the gate. Aminata thanks him for his diligence. She asks where the sealed lot from last month is stored. He hesitates. Hesitation is a hinge, too, and it creaks. Katie's notebook supplies a lot code from 3 weeks ago that should be cousins with today's. The storeroom yields no such cousin. The cereals have forked. Forks do not happen by accident in systems built for sameness. The truth emerges as a choreography of small exposures, each one simple enough to teach. The docket from the back gate shows a delivery at 21:13 the night before. Unusual because the kitchen closes at 19 sao. The guard's log shows a temporary pass issued to a driver whose license number, when read backward, matches a warehouse employee's younger brother. The warehouse's ledger has a row where dates skip a day, as if the calendar had caught its breath and forgotten to exhale. A WhatsApp message from an unknown number instructed a clerk to make room for a rush lot, Ally's gift, with a waving hand emoji that makes the stomach go cold. Nobody says the word poison. Everyone says the word gate. The obstructive official becomes legible in his own ink. One oval seal is darker than the others because it has been pressed twice, a move that requires practice. The second pressing covers a faint initial that belongs to a quality control officer on leave. The forgery is more tired than clever, the kind done by men who believe procedures will always forgive them because procedures are paid to be polite. Awa is the one who notices the fingerprint in the bleed, a thumbprint just large enough to be fed to the new scanner the ministry bought last year to look modern. The scanner confirms nothing the heart didn't already suspect. The exposure is made clean, not theatrical. Ibrahim releases a statement that speaks of a compromised lot and a breach in chain of custody, words that belong to systems but can be understood by anyone who has ever left bread out too long. He names no ally. He names a practice. He strips glamour off conspiracy, reduces it to paperwork and a careless thumb. It is both accurate and strategic. People who mean harm often want the credit. He denies them the poetry they crave. He promises a public audit, beginning with procurement. He promises to publish 3 numbers weekly, time to hold on suspect goods, chain of custody exceptions, and complaints resolved. He promises a complaint channel that replies with a human voice in one day, not the mechanical sigh that has kept citizens obedient for a generation. Sorry tries for righteousness. He claims to be the victim of a broader plot against order. He uses the word ally as if it were a shield. Aminata does not argue in public. She brings to Ibrahim, in private, the pages with the fingerprints. She brings the WhatsApp message with the waving hand. She brings Katie's notebook and the gap in the storeroom where last month's lot should be. Each item is a small door open to light. Together they form a hallway that leads out of a stale room. The leader does not perform shock. He breathes. He says, "We mend the hinge." Reform begins with something small enough to remember on a bad day. Aminata drafts the first bite protocol that Ibrahim named in the heat of the kitchen and gives it a number that looks official without sounding inhuman. Circular, 7 to BB, breath before billing. It is stapled not just to notice boards, but to the insides of cupboard doors and to the backs of clipboards carried by porters. It fits on one page. It says, treat first, test a pair, hold a batch if any tongue doubts, write the facts in 4 places, a card, a ledger, a phone photograph, and the public kitchen board. It forbids any delivery after 19, unless the head nurse or duty officer signs the receipt in ink both at the gate and at the sink. It bans lot codes that do not match the pattern learned by Kadi's notebook. It is enforced not by slogans, but by shelves that remain empty until the rule is satisfied. The metric board is embarrassingly plain. It hangs near the blue door where steam and light make prints curl, so they laminate it. 3 numbers update at noon and at close. Door to help minutes. Chain exceptions in 24H. Complaints resolved. No decimals. No flourishes. If a number is bad, it looks bad, and it stays bad until a human does something measurable to bring it down. The board is copied to an online dashboard with the same 3 lines. Papa Idris reads those lines on his show like football scores. The public learns the language without being taught. They begin to ask their clinics and schools whether their boards breathe too. Some bristle at this publicness. Most feel the relief of finally seeing the hinge. Funding is where reforms go to rust, so Ibrahim moves the money gate away from the place where taste and favors live. He orders a standing reserve for critical kitchen items, bought transparently at the start of each quarter and replenished like water, not like champagne. He ties procurement's bonuses to the absence of after-hours deliveries, not the appearance of savings from consolidations that create irresistible shadows. He moves the power to hold a batch into the hands of the clinic nurse and the duty guard, 2 roles that have always been present and under-respected. He lets them say no without asking a director's permission. Those no's are entered into the ledger like acts of care. They can be audited later without fear. The complaint channel is a number with a person on the other end. They choose Awa for the first rotation, not because she is perfect, but because she knows how to speak in a tone that makes frightened people breathe. The service level agreement is written on the same board as the 3 metrics, so it cannot hide. All complaints acknowledged within 1 day, preliminary response in 2, resolution or clear reason in 7. They make the default explain in simple words and sign with a name. They ban the phrase per our policy, unless it is followed by the sentence that explains the human value that policy is supposed to serve. It sounds quaint. It works. Training is a drill in the break room at Temo hour on Tuesdays. A nurse places 2 cups on a tray, 1 with tap water, 1 with a blush of vinegar. A cook and a guard taste in sequence while a clerk writes the time. They wait 5 minutes, then both initial the card and the tray goes to the sink for a photograph. It feels childish the first week, then satisfying, then boring. Boredom is a sign of reform working. The drill asks nothing heroic. It asks for repetition, and it makes that repetition visible so that when an anxious day comes, muscle memory arrives before theater. The audit is neither a witch hunt nor a shrug. It names broken mechanisms and the places where petty gatekeepers cut light. It records after-hours deliveries and the times a seal looked too dark. It identifies vendors who played both sides of a hinge. It refers 3 cases to prosecutors because laws exist for a reason. And it remands 1 manager to retraining because errors are not crimes when a culture has taught people to cut corners to breathe. It is published on the website with phone numbers unstuck. When people call, someone answers. Sori loses his position not because the public must witness a fall, but because everyone who walked the corridor knew the hinge had been his to oil, and he had chosen to profit from its squeal. He is charged not with drama, but with forgery and breach of duty. The difference matters. The kitchen shifts shape. The ledger now sits under a small lamp that stays on even when the sun dies, so late entries do not wear the chaos of fatigue. The blue door receives a new plate that reads simply, Gate of care. Someone laughs at the sentiment and then stops because the humor is not untrue. Miriam returns to work a week later. She moves slower for a time, but she insists on tasting the mint that goes into the couscous, tapping the spoon against the rim the way her mother did when she taught her that worship can be measured in small attentions. She asked to lead the Tuesday drill once. Salif brings his oxygen tank to show the team how many minutes it holds at different flows, and the cooks, who have spent lifetimes learning timing, nod as if he has shown them a new way to read a familiar clock. By the time the month turns over, the board's numbers feel like the pulse of a living thing rather than a PR exercise. The delegation leaves. The ally who sent the letter receives no return correspondence beyond a diplomatic reminder about chain of custody and the privilege of routine. Fate keeps its secrets. Culture does not. The system that once breathed only when someone kicked it now inhales on time, exhales on schedule, does not gasp when asked to prove it can be trusted. Doors close softly. Hinges stay oiled. The smell of ginger returns as fragrance, not threat. The boredom of good systems requires maintenance like any garden. Months later, the guest house mornings look like they always should have. A clerk traces letters into the ledger with a neatness that makes the page itself breathe easier. Awa's phone vibrates with 2 minor complaints before tea, and she answers both with the same calm she once used to steady a panicking room. Kadi refills the tea tin and updates her notebook out of habit, though the official ledger now mirrors it so closely that she sometimes forgets which is which. The Tuesday drill becomes a social punctuation in the week, a ritual that seems, to outsiders, beneath the dignity of a state kitchen, and to insiders, as ordinary as washing hands. The tray arrives, the cups are tasted, the 5 minutes pass, the photo is taken against the clock's unchanging face. The board's 3 lines remain visible to any passerby, as indifferent to praise as to scorn. What began as a wound, one worker's breath shortened by a jar, became a hinge the city noticed in its own doors. A school canteen copies the first bite protocol, renaming it the 2 spoons rule so the children remember it. A clinic in a distant neighborhood, where the oxygen has always arrived late, paints its own board and begins to track door-to-help minutes with chalk. The transit depot experiments with a cousin reform. First brake check, a drill so simple the drivers laugh at first, then adopt without argument when they see bus downtime falling in a week. This is how culture shifts when it is not ordered but invited. It moves through the paths that ordinary competence already cut. Sori's office gathers dust for weeks before a new director arrives. Younger, nervy, a woman who rehangs the fan and leaves the safe door open as a message to herself. The prosecution did not become a spectacle. It became a caution in a few staff meetings where the phrase double stamp is now a punchline. The WhatsApp rumors that once swelled into their own weather have quieted into what they are good at. Warnings about potholes, reminders about blood drives, the occasional photograph of a dashboard with a proud low number. Papa Idris keeps reading the 3 lines on the radio without adornment. Some listeners miss the old drama of corruption stories that never ended. Most, having tasted a system that explains itself like a bread recipe, find themselves strangely content with silence. Miriam's breath is full. On Fridays, she leads the mint tasting with a gravity that would make anyone else seem ridiculous, but in her hands feels like respect. She still walks past the blue door with a palm across the plate that says Gate of Care, and this touching act spreads. Guards touch the plate as they finish shifts. Drivers brush it with envelopes they take to payroll, perhaps because the metal holds a coolness that promises order can outlast a hot day. Ibrahim passes it without ceremony, yet he too lifts his palm once in a while, the way a person salutes a useful habit when no one is watching. Leadership takes its place at the edge of the frame, and, for once, does not insist on the center. The ledger, which once merely recorded, now narrates a different story, where a refusal to accept a delivery is an act of service, where a batch hold saves more than a face, where a complaint acknowledged becomes a friendship between citizen and corridor. The audit teams do their rounds monthly. They bring no sirens. They bring thermometers and strip tests and a sturdiness that has learned to speak in short sentences. They correct gently. They praise publicly. They keep their reports readable. This is not softness, but a far-seeing strictness. It is harder to keep a garden than to burn a field. Outside the walls, markets follow. The ginger woman under the green umbrella now scrawls lot codes on a small board beside her baskets, laughing that she has become more official than the officials. Customers choose her table because they can see the ledger breathe. The money she earns buys her nephew a scooter for deliveries. The scooter has a small sticker on its dash that reads, "Treat first, bill later." In a world eager for grandeur, these tiny inscriptions carry more rebellion than any march. They make safety a habit rather than a hope. The story of an ally's letter has faded into a warning that people tell when someone uses the word brother too easily. The truth-telling aide still walks the long corridor, still sees where the dust gathers fastest. The courageous insider answers calls even on her off days because fear is rude and sometimes arrives without appointment. The obstructive official becomes a cautionary tale told in training sessions with just enough detail to make it feel human. The leader, still quiet, still steady, is credited for having done something many leaders consider beneath them. He mended a hinge that everyone had learned to kick. No portraits are hung for that, but the doors in the city close softly now, and behind them, breath flows, and ledgers grow old without becoming lies. Here, at the quiet edge of the story, we leave you with the simple courage of ordinary people and the soft click of a hinge that now closes clean. If this journey moved you, carry it forward, in your kitchens, clinics, classrooms, and in the small rituals that keep a city breathing. And if you liked the video, then like, share, comment, and subscribe.